Good morning. My name is Latuperissa. If I sound like a frog, it's because I've been talking too much, so my apologies on that. But welcome to the Expo in Travel and Tourism Education. I represent the California Inland Empire Deck, and I have a team here, and I see that Luke is here. He's part of the team in putting in the travel and tourism together, and I don't see Sandra, but she's probably speaking at the event, but I'm just delighted to represent the panel. And some of you have already had an opportunity to take a look at the bios, but I will briefly kind of give an overview what tourism is. Really what we're going to be focusing in on is rural tourism. You probably heard that already this morning, rural agriculture. For some of you that are into backpacking, boating, everything relates to rural tourism on that. So having said that, when we take a look at community-based tourism, we've got a nice, diverse speakers on that. I'll start out with Mr. Koka Lakshman. He's the vice chairman for Soboba Band of Louisiana Indians Economic Development Corporation out of San Jacinto, California. He's been a successful speaker. He's heading the establishing one of the first banking for the Native Americans, not one of the first one, but on the West Coast. So we're excited to hear more about that, and how do you work with Native Americans in relation to travel and tourism on that. In addition to that, he has a vast experience in managing nonprofit organizations. He's the chief executive officer of a medical group, very diverse, a truly entrepreneur. He was born in India and raised in the United States. And I think one of the things, what happened with Koka is his parents must have sent him out when he was 15 years old, and he got his master's when he was 21 years old. So with that, please welcome Mr. Koka Lakshman.
Good morning. We'll be starting off with a...
Sure, you can come up here.
I'm from the West Coast, but I think this system actually belongs to the NADEC, so I don't know if it's East Coast or West Coast radio now.
Koka, why don't you go ahead and speak, and I'll see if I can work on that. Go ahead.
It's not informal. Not the traditional talk of tourism. Can you use a microphone?
I didn't really want to get into the typical tourism talk. I think all of you are familiar and experienced enough to know what the tourism is, but I just want to touch some things that what I see, how some of the companies in our area look at. The basic thing is why export. Probably everybody has different reasons, but the basic reasons are, besides getting some foreign revenue, the way I look at it is you're actually increasing your customer base. Going from the traditional clients here in the area to international, and areas where you don't need to really go there, you personally go there to do business, but you can still do the business. And one of the other questions is, what besides products and services can we export? I mean, you could on the block for the Inland Empire deck, and the way it's being looked upon is either do export products or services. But I think a lot of people kind of tend to forget or not look at, or something that I feel that is easily overlooked as an export product is actually tourism. Because you're not exporting something out there, right? You're actually, I know you're importing the people, but that's probably one of the best exports that we can do, where it doesn't cost us anything, and bring them to our hometowns so they can bring their, whether it's dollars or any type of revenue over, and also get to do business with people that are here. In my opinion, tourism is probably the most profitable export. If you think about it, the tourism actually, the revenue comes through to every single entity out there. Whether it's a restaurant, or a golf course, casino, even the city, because the city gets the funds from the tax revenue, including the bed tax that they get, and all the entertainment that you're able to provide, and also the events, especially with Airbnb nowadays. Even small towns, bread and breakfast entities are able to bring in people where they'll bring you the revenues. I know some smaller towns might feel like, what do we have that can attract tourism? But every town has something. You know, I come from a small town called Emmett, and it's actually twin cities there, Emmett and Jacinto. Very small town, and we're talking about the seniors and the snowbirds. All that comes into play. Emmett used to be a retirement town. But when you look at what do we have, there are so many beautiful things in our valley that's really not spread out there. The people are not using or marketing it to bring people in. We have the longest running outdoor play, 99 years running. It's going to be 100 years next year. We have a beautiful lake there where you have fishing. And we also have a Soboba casino. Just so you know how profitable or how lucrative these things can be, it went from a casino in a tent to actually a beautiful resort casino now in town, a couple of years old. And we also have a marathon. It's called the Diamond Valley Lake Marathon. You run an entire marathon around the lake. It's gorgeous, gorgeous lake. And with the snowbirds coming in every year, especially from Canada, you know, we bring all those Canadian dollars. So I just want you folks to have an open mind and look at what you or your smaller towns might have and see how we can promote it. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Nate, and I'll briefly give a little overview of this. Nate is the former president and CEO of Vermillion Area Chamber of Commerce from one of my favorite states, South Dakota. His responsibility, of course, falls in the area of travel and tourism, and this is one of the key areas that we want to share with you, especially South Dakota, being in a rural area, is one of one of the top destination on that. He's also a former chair of the South Dakota Chamber and Economic Development Professional Council. His education, he studied mass communication and broadcasting and sociology from the University of Nebraska, and double major in management and entrepreneur studies from the University of Sioux Falls. But the interesting part was, in his younger days, he was selected as one of the youngest general manager in the country, in the county, of professional baseball team, Sioux Falls Canaries. So, welcome, Dave, and I'd love to hear more about baseball and hear about tourism. I look forward to share some of the challenges that you have in South Dakota, and of course some of the successes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. You're right. I was lucky enough to be in the game, involved in the game of baseball, and I never once really went onto the field because I am very, very bad at throwing the baseball, and I'm extremely bad at hitting the baseball. And I think that's what made me a good promotion and general manager, was I understood the average fan's perspective and what would get them out to the park. So thank you for that. As Fred had mentioned, my most recent role was the president and CEO of the Vermillion Area Chamber Development Company. Vermillion, South Dakota is a town of just over 11,600 people. It's down in the southeast corner of South Dakota. If you're familiar with South Dakota, we have the plains on the east, we have the Black Hills and Mount Rushmore on the west. Our favorite type of tourism that we get on the east is when someone doesn't realize that Mount Rushmore is on the west and they have to pass through the east to get there, and we just say, hey, grab a cup of coffee, stay a night, and then drive 6 hours west and you'll find Mount Rushmore. So we try to play to some of those strengths. No, really, when it comes to tourism, especially in rural communities, especially in South Dakota, 66% of our population in our communities are rural compared to any type of a metro that's even over 50,000. South Dakota itself is just under 880,000 people in population. One thing that we were able to do, and I'll talk a little bit just really when it comes to playing to your strengths, South Dakota does a very good job of that. And quite honestly, we all know how detrimental COVID was. COVID was extremely challenging, and of course, where I was most recently at, we ran the Chamber of Commerce, where we had to take care of our businesses, which had to, pivot all day long. We had to take care of our economic development responsibilities, which had to figure out how do you grow, how do you sustain those businesses. And then, of course, the tourism side, when a lot of that revenue, of course, was starting to really drop, we had to figure out how we manage that. What we did specifically in Vermillion was we did what we always do when it came to leveraging and combining those three entities to be able to work together and ultimately all row in that same direction, even if they were in different boats. And whether it was during COVID or whether it was out of COVID, that unity that we would have a lot of times helped build us up to be able to play to those strengths. And so I mentioned the COVID time because I also mentioned where South Dakota, our second leading industry is tourism. First, of course, is agriculture. Second is tourism. One strength that we had, 880,000 people, just to give you a real quick summary, is in about 77,000 square miles, ultimately means about 11 people have 1 square mile, fit in 1 square mile themselves. If you want to play the math game out of that, that's 1 person per 2.5 million square feet. If you needed to look at the social distancing requirements that we have, right? 36 square feet per person. Come on in to South Dakota, you got plenty of space. And so we really were able to not take advantage, but be able to figure out where our weaknesses, where our strengths. South Dakota's been doing that all along. As we mentioned, communities identify where their strengths are. South Dakota had a really neat ability in being able to be proud of the unique weirdness that we would have. Has anyone heard of the Corn Palace in South Dakota? Has anyone heard, this one actually might be kind of fun, has anyone heard of the National Music Museum with the largest collection of musical instruments in the world? See, that's one we're working on. That one's located in Vermillion, South Dakota. A fun thing that we always say is, people will say, well, as a museum, it's not like you have the Mona Lisa. Well, the Mona Lisa was valued at just under 2.5 or $250,000. We have the Mona Lisa of instruments, the King Cello, which is just over $2.5 or $250,000 of a value, or 2.5. I can't remember what that was. And so telling that story is where we advance to that. Of course, everyone's heard of Mount Rushmore. Of course, a lot of people probably have seen signs for Wall Drug. If you've ever seen that around? That comes from a family that was just having a drugstore, and the wife told the husband, hey, why don't you go put a sign out on the interstate so we can do that. I don't know if he just wasn't too into hanging out with his wife, but he then went and put signs all over the place and all over the world to be able to help promote that. And so people think to themselves, well, have you heard of this place? Yeah, let's go check that out. And then we leverage the next strength, of course, of that beauty of our spaces. And then, of course, the people that are in that. And that has allowed us to be able to really attract and be able to get advocacy of people saying, hey, if you want to go somewhere, go to South Dakota. And so then on the rural side, we played off of the strengths of that state to be able to build together. So we weren't competing with the West. I like to joke that we have that West side, but we were adding the special part of what we have. So one of the things that we even did in Vermillion specifically, we helped get people to just turn their head and go, what? Because South Dakota, this is a fun fact, South Dakota has more beachfront property than all of Florida, which I love, which is kind of a neat little thing where people don't realize. Well, Vermillion, South Dakota, a small town of 11,600, was ranked the most exciting place in South Dakota, and that was because of some fun, ranking things that we had. So we created shirts that said the Miami of South Dakota. And what it did was it allowed people to simply go, wait, what? Why is that the Miami of South Dakota? And we simply say we have more beachfront property than all of Florida, and the most exciting place in South Dakota is Vermillion, South Dakota. You gotta check it out. And so it allowed us to be able to tell that story, and it allowed us to be able to continually get individuals to be able to come. And so by utilizing those strengths, we really were able to be able to manage through that. I would say that that's probably one of the most important things for us to be able to do.
Well, thank you, Nate. Just to summarize, I wanted to kind of highlight for those of you that came in a little bit later, Koka, he covered the tourism from a travel and tourism perspective as it relates to Native Americans. What's the impact in terms of economic development, and how does Native Americans deal with that, in particular in the area of rural. And of course, with Nate, provide a nice background in terms of what's happening out in South Dakota. And some of the things that we talked about this morning is the rural area. We visited one of the many different cities such as Los Angeles, Chicago, Florida. But I think there's some opportunities out there where you have a chance to visit places, rural places such as Hemet, California, or South Dakota on that. But the person that really puts all these statistics together as it relates to international travel, and we have the honor to have him here, is David Huether. He's the Deputy Director of Research at the National Travel and Tourism Office for the Department of Commerce. He's a former Senior Vice President for Research with the U.S. Travel Association. He also was the former Chief Economist for the National Association for Manufacture, received his bachelor's from Guilford College and a master's from George Washington University. So Dave, we're excited to hear about how does the statistics relate to what we're talking about, and I think that's very important. People are here, they want to hear about that a little bit, so
okay.
You're up.
Great. First of all, who's here from out of town or stayed in a hotel in the last night or so? Congratulations, you're all travelers. What's interesting, so when I started my career at the Commerce Department, Bureau of Economic Analysis, which makes GDP numbers up, and then I went to the National Association of Manufacturers, and then I went to the U.S. Travel Association, which is a totally different world. There is, when you say what's the travel industry, I mean, if you you're familiar with NAICS codes and all this stuff. There is no NAICS codes for the travel industry. It's by definition, when you travel and you spend money at Disney World or at a restaurant or going to Mount Rushmore or going to New York and go shopping or coming internationally in the United States, you are a traveler. What's the impact of that? How much is it? So I work at part of the International Trade Administration. Our office develops the official government statistics on travel and tourism. So we estimate not only the economic impact of both domestic and international travel to and within the United States, but we also measure international travel to the United States from 250 countries and regions on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we also track outbound travel. When you think of, if you went to Senator Grassley, he's in Iowa, and you say, how much did you export of corn? And he'll be able to tell you. You go to the Census Bureau, you see agriculture exports from Iowa or wherever. But for international travel, when international people come to the United States and travel, so they come into JFK, where do they go? We don't track our cell phones. We have no idea. And what do? We do have an idea. The reason why we do have an idea is that our office actually conducts a congressionally mandated survey of international air travelers. So when someone from Germany or someone from China comes to the United States, when they're leaving and they're in the airports, we actually survey them and they say, where'd you come from? What'd you do? What states did you visit? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we get the profiles of international visitors who come to the United States. So that's kind of what we do. And we also measure travel exports and imports. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what's happened in travel and tourism. Specifically, I'll talk about international over the last couple of years. Going up to the pandemic, the travel industry was generally growing a little faster than the overall economy during the last 10 years. So its share of employment went from about 5 to 6% of total employment in the United States. It was supported about 9 million jobs. Pretty good. Travel's labor intensive. So it's more labor intensive than say manufacturing. And travel rose from like 2.5 to about 3% GDP. So again, we're growing a little faster than the overall economy. In terms of international visitors, people from abroad coming to the United States, increased from about 60 million in 2010 to about 80 million in 2019. It's a pretty big surge. And so when you think about international visitation in the United States, think of it from 3 places. You have it from our NAFTA partners, Canadians come to the United States, Mexicans come to the United States, and then the rest of the world, which we call overseas. And they're kind of split in like 25%, 25%, 50% for overseas. Overseas is important because they spend a heck of a lot more money than the Canadians and the Mexicans who come here. So they may represent 75% of spending, even though they're half of visitation of the country. In terms of exports or spending in the United States by international travelers, in 2019 it topped out at about $240 billion. And you say, well, how much is that? Sounds like a lot. It was actually 9.5% of total U.S. exports and business services. So nearing 10%, 10% of all U.S. exports was travel and tourism. With the caveat that the way the government measures that is not just people coming here for vacation or business, but it also includes international students going to Harvard or going to University of Chicago. Their tuition and their living expenses when they're in the United States is actually counted as a travel export. Or if you're from the UK and you want to have surgery, you want to have heart surgery, you want to wait, so you come to Johns Hopkins, you have surgery, and you get surgery, that's a travel export. That's not as big, education's pretty big. And there are actually wings of hospitals that actually just cater to international patients. So, as you can imagine, in 2020, when the Trump administration, because of the COVID outbreak globally, basically said, we're not having international travel from the United States anymore. They basically banned travel both from China, all of Europe, Canada, Mexico, India, Iran, etc. That added up to something in the area of about 8% of potential visitors were basically banned from the United States. So, as you can imagine, travel and tourism took it on the chin in 2020. And this is actually a startling statistic, but it's true. The travel industry was responsible for more than half the decline in U.S. GDP in 2020. 58% of the decline in U.S. GDP in 2020 was travel and tourism, both internationally and domestic as well. And about 37% of the employment decline was just because of travel, the decline in travel. So if you look at what declined, well, kind of everything declined. Domestic travel, residential travel fell, 50% or something like that. International inbound travel fell about 80% in 2020 and was responsible for approximately 40% of the decline in U.S. exports in 2020. So no one says this, but you could characterize 2020 as a travel recession, which was very unique, never happened before. As you can say, international visitation collapsed 95% in 2 months, from 3 million in February of 2020 to less than 250,000 in April. It stayed that way with some modest increases, particularly from South America. I'll get into why in a second, because it's actually a very interesting story. But then the Biden administration, with the COVID relaxations, Biden administration lifted the travel bans on November 11th of last year. Since that time, there has been a significant rebound in international visitation to the United States. As of in April of this year, we just published data on this 3 days ago. International visitation to the United States topped 2 million, which was the first time more than 2 million people came to the United States since COVID happened. To put it in perspective, it's still about 40% below where it was. If you look at April 2019, compare April now, to say like how was it? How is it now compared to the pre-COVID? We're still about 40% down. But in terms of international visitation in the United States. But in October, we were about 80% down. So it's been very interesting to see what happens as we get to the summer months. That's typically when international travel comes to the United States, typically in the summer. In terms of who's coming to the United States right now, the rebound is not monolithic. It is not coming from Asia. You're not seeing the Chinese come back, Japanese, South Koreans, or the Australians that much. India is having a stronger recovery, but the biggest upturn in the last 5-6 months has been from Europe. Europe is where the strength is right now. That's where we're seeing the biggest increases. And again, we're not at the pre-pandemic levels, but that's probably the area that we're seeing most of the growth. During the pandemic, when there was visitation to the United States, there was actually one country where visitation in 2021 was higher than what it was in 2019. It was Colombia. And we couldn't figure out why. Why is visitation to Colombia so high? So I talked to somebody and found the reason why. They were coming here for vaccines. And they couldn't get them now. And if you look at Mexican air travel in 2021 and 2020, it was rather significant. It was very, very high. There wasn't a ban on air travel from Mexico to the United States. They could still come here. But where they were going was different than where they were going before the pandemic. They were all going to Houston. And the reason was the same reason why. They were coming here for vaccines. So near term, it looks like Europeans travel is coming back further. Now, I want to conclude just to give you information. If you're interested in this, interested in the state of international travel, one of the things that happened to us during the COVID is that the survey that we do, we couldn't do the survey that much in 2020 because no one was coming. We had extra money to spend. So we spent it creating data visualization tools. So if you go to our website, type in the National Travel and Tourism Office, and go to the research section, there are, for every program we have, international inbound, survey, outbound, travel exports, we have data visualization that you can look at. And the most exciting and interesting one is this data visualization product that's based on the survey of international air travelers. So what we can do now is from 2012 all the way through 2020, and we'll be adding 2021 sometime later this year. You can go in and say, I want to look at 2019. I want to look at, I don't know, I pick my old data set. I pick Germany. And I want to pick and see, what do the Germans do in Cincinnati, or Grand Rapids, or Houston, or wherever, or any state? And click that, and we'll tell you how many went there, what they did, what their travel patterns were, what percentage would stay in hotels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we are trying to bring our data to the non-data geeks and do a new visualization. And one of the mandates from Capitol Hill has been to make our data more usable to the smaller states and destinations. It used to be that we could only publish where international visitors went to about 20 states and like 50 cities. But through some improvements in methodology changes, we can now show international visitation to all 50 states and more than 80 cities. And not so much in 2021 and 2020 when no one came, but for regular years. So when we get back to 2022, we should be able to produce that information. So I just encourage you, there's one more thing I'll tell you, is that we produce 3 sets of data every single month. Travel exports and imports, international visitation to the United States, and we also produce data on international air traffic from every U.S. airport to every international airport globally. So you can say, I want to know how many people travel from Heathrow Airport to JFK on any day, or any month, or any quarter of any year, going back like 5 years. And how many of those people coming to the United States were non-U.S. citizens? How many people were U.S. citizens going to Heathrow? So we can actually track airport travel from every airport in the United States, it's an international airport, to every airport globally.
Okay, Dave,
So-
thank you very much. We're running a little short. I just want to open up some questions here. And some of you, go ahead, please.
I'm curious on your statistics. Have you, has Dakota, ever looked at using details from international foreign other than credit cards, used like hotels and eating establishments and other types of services to get a sense where they're spending their money? Anything along those lines to help track?
The Bureau of Economic Analysis, which actually estimates travel exports and imports, tried that, and we supply our survey data to them, and they make estimates on spending. They tried using credit card data, and then it didn't work, and so they decided not to use it. It's very tricky though. When I used to work at U.S. Travel, we investigated using, and that data was very popular within the travel industry. So a lot of destinations and states use credit card data to look at like who's coming, et cetera, et cetera.
I have an advanced question for Nate here from a marketing perspective. This came up from some of the colleagues in the audience. Question I thought was very critical. How do you develop tourism in a rural community, as an example, in South Dakota?
Side note, I don't know if anyone does Netflix or anything, but if anyone's watched Inventing Anna, when he was saying that they couldn't follow the credit card stuff, in my mind I was just thinking it was because she wasn't actually paying, but that might not be the issue. If you watch that show, you understand. when it comes to developing tourism in a rural community, one of the things that I would really say, especially on the marketing side, and I'll kind of try not to go on a little tangent here, but if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, there's a fantastic theory of the why, right? If you ever get a chance on the marketing side, take a look at that, because he ultimately talks about understand your why, which is basically what and why you're doing something, right? Then you understand how you're doing it, then you understand what you're doing. On a marketing side and a sales side, the value in that is when people go to where they agree with you, you're attracting those who are there with your why. You're getting very loyal customers. And so when you look at a bell curve, you get those right away initiators, you get right away the people who want to go there. The ones at the end are the last ones to buy. They're the ones who attract for your what. And the reason why I say that is because, one, I love data, and I am, in fact, I hadn't even found out about that, the visualization. I'm super excited to jump into that, because that I think is fantastic. But what I would always say is in the marketing side, understand your why and understand what you are, and then utilize the data to go after those who you know will be attracted to it. And that is one of the things that we really are able to do. On the rural side of it, as I mentioned earlier, we leverage, or I think some of the most successful ones are we leverage that economic development, the chamber side, and the tourism side. When you think about how each of those have their separate missions and goals, they also have an intersection that is always tied to tourism. A lot of people will often say tourism is your front porch of economic development, it's your front porch of Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce, as we were just talking about, are those restaurants. They're the ones who are individually talking and individually serving to those visitors that you have. That is part of your experience. The businesses that you're trying to attract, as those continue to grow, they're able to build and add to the amenities of what your community is. And so we often go to what those strengths are and what people want to do with them. The other example that I've given is one of the things that we did specifically even in Vermillion was a community of 10,600 people, or 11,600 now with the new census. We have a Division I university. It's 11,000 in enrollment, ultimately about the same size as what our population is in the additional population. We have no convention space other than what's on the university. Travelers or conventions or anything like that, we can't compete with big convention centers like this, right? But what we can compete with is the unique ability in saying, you want to go to a conference with 300 people, come to our downtown, and instead of staying in a convention center all day, you're going to bounce from restaurant to restaurant, coffee shop to coffee shop with your breakout sessions. And now we're selling the experience of that conference, of that opportunity to be able to experience something different. We're not trying to sell to those who want to be able to kind of take a convention center, which is a great space. We're trying to sell to those who are looking for something different, because that's what we have to offer, and that allows us to be able to do that. If we are driven first by the data, even as a community, you have often heard of the expression in an organization called mission creep. When you try to go to where you think the numbers are, you often are behind in those. But when you identify what you are and you figure out how to utilize those numbers to elevate what you are, that's how we're able to really promote that. And that's how we've been able to really continuously build. The other thing that I would give is one of the things that we were able to do when it came to COVID was we were on a 5-year increase of our first, our second, and our third penny sales tax. In South Dakota, third penny would be our BPP tax. That's one where we really follow a lot of our tourism dollars, especially. We turned it up for 6 years straight. Of course, COVID happens, we drop, we bounce back up, and we bounce in the same trend of what we were going, as though COVID never happened for us. It's just that little skip. And so we were able to continue the trend because we went back to what we were doing after we needed to adjust. I think that's one of the key things on that marketing is understand what your story is, tell your story, and sharpen that side of the story.
Very good. Question here. Go ahead, right here, sir.
David, thank you very much for your data. That's very useful. And I have a question about related industries. In addition to actual travel, is anyone, are you or anyone measuring the economic contributions of related industries like resort planning, hospitality, education, training, civil engineering, all those things that we are expert in the United States that I don't know that we're measuring that?
Okay, so the answer is yes. So and there are typically travel output, or travel tourism output divided into three components. One is called direct spending, so it's spending by travelers, international investment. Right? And then the other two components, one that we also estimate is indirect output. So for this hotel to operate, it needs output from the food industry. It needs output from the living industry by call it napkins. It has to buy telecommunications equipment. So all those input costs, which is called indirect output, the government also estimates. What the government doesn't estimate, but what I use the word does estimate, is called induced output, which means that all of the workers in the travel industry and the indirect workers who are supported by travel are also consumers and they want to spend money. That's called induced output. For some reason, the U.S. government is forbidden of doing induced output, so we don't do that. The government's not allowed to do that, but we do estimate indirect output and direct output. So at our website, as well as the Bureau of Economic Analysis website, there is a product called Travel and Tourism Satellite Account. It does that at the national level, not at the state level, unfortunately.
Question, sir.
So do you know if the travel, tourism, and education entities are eligible for the SBA and the ExIm working capital loan guarantees, considering that you have foreign receivables that are considered exports?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I could take it and find the answer to it.
I mean, we should ask Daniel Shea, who's here today from the SBA trade office. And because if banks can get a 90% guarantee to provide you with funding to grow your export programs, why not?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Let me follow up on a question here to Koka. Koka, in particular on the West Coast, naval tribal community, they've attracted a lot of tourism. One, of course, is because of the casinos. How can tourism help small communities such as Hemet, and how do they attract foreign visitors, which is considered an export, in a tribal community such as Soboba?
You know, people don't realize it, being from a small town, when we look at what brings in the most revenue, it's really tourism. Especially for the Native Americans there, you know, they started off with a bingo hall, and they have, you know, created now a beautiful resort and casino. And when we look at the whole thing, they are the largest employer in our valley. And if you look at who does the most supporting donations for the charities, again, same thing. I'm the past chairman of our Chamber of Commerce, Regional Chamber of Commerce. The most they have done is to really bring people, typically because we're Southern California, we're a suburb of Los Angeles, so people come to LA. So from LA, how do you bring them to Hemet, San Jacinto Valley? That's the biggest thing like we were talking about. I think the key is to find out what your strengths are and play to that. Don't worry about weakness, because no one or nothing is perfect anyway. So use what you have to bring these people in. And casino obviously draws a lot of crowd, but not everyone likes to gamble. So when they can also come there for relaxation purposes. We have golf there. And then we have a chemical club, about half hour, 35 minutes from Hemet, San Jacinto, where we have wine country. Yeah, and then there's actually a beautiful museum there we were talking about. It's a green museum. And then we started it's called a Diamond Valley Lake Run, as I mentioned earlier. where we do a marathon, half marathon, a 5K like everybody else does, but we also added a senior K walk and a kid run to make it more of a family event to draw people over here. Because I tell you, if the tourism does not happen in our valley, I'm not sure how the valley can survive. I think that's something that's crucial for us. I know you hear sometimes people saying, oh, there are tourists coming, too many tourists. But without the tourists, you're not there. I mean, for us, when the snowbirds come from Canada, believe me, they spend so much money there, restaurants and everything else you can think of. But what we have done, because we also have a medical group, so especially with the electronic medical records, now we tied with the Canadian health system there. So when these people come here, we actually have their medical records, so they're able to have continuity of care. So I think it's really important to make sure that we provide the care and the service. The small towns are known for, I don't want to say a wrong word, but small towns are known for like real people, if you want to call it. They're not commercial in that sense. So when they come and they see, when they meet you, they know how you are. And a lot of these tourists, when they come back, they know the people. They want to go to the same places. They want to go to the same place. So I think it's very important that we take care of these people.
Let me go back to the audience. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm Brian Liu from Nebraska, DAC. David's give us a lot of very amazing statistics. Yeah. I was involved in education before the pandemic with University of Nebraska, Omaha. And a lot of people probably don't know the how much average international students spend over the course of their studies. They probably, most of them spend twice, 3 times more than a resident student. And on top of that, it's like an average traveler. They spend traveling and shopping and all kind of things. However, as soon as the pandemic hits, that part of activity almost stopped. The program on hold, and part of that is also the geopolitical relationship between U.S. and China. And I'm asking David, would that aspect not going to get better? I see it kind of getting worse. So how do you balance the relationship, the revenue, the economy with the national security, and where do you see that kind of education and tourism from China 2-3 years from now?
So I'll talk about what I can talk about. So I'm not an expert on security or that information, so I won't get into that. But I will tell you, you identified the correct country in the sense that if you say, well, how much do international students spend in the United States? Or like, where are they from? Well, most of them are from like 5 countries. It's China, Taiwan, South Korea, India, and Saudi Arabia. Those 5. Those 5 are like 80% of the spend. Something like that. China's number 1. Interestingly, that component of Chinese spending in the United States didn't decline as much as everything else. So I think what happened was, for a lot of places, the Chinese students that were here just stayed. So it dropped because new people were coming in, but of those Chinese students who were here, I think a large portion of them, or a portion of them, stayed here and just continued to go to school. because it didn't, like, the Chinese leisure traveler, like their spending fell 95% or whatever, right? It collapsed down to zero because no one was coming. But education spending may have fallen by 50% or something like that. It didn't fall as much. So I mean, I don't know. We don't forecast, and we don't forecast that particular thing. But I suspect that there probably will have. I mean, there'll be some political consideration of if that rebounds or not. And if it doesn't rebound as much due to political reasons on either their shores or our shores, I mean that will have a measurable impact on the education community. Not as much travel towards the United States as much, but for the education community, it will have an impact. And it's not. Most people think about the international students coming here and going to college. It's more than that. They're coming here to go to high school, and they're coming here to go to high school because if they're here in high school, it's easier for them to get into U.S. colleges. And so, in fact, my daughter goes to school, went to a high school in rural southern Maryland, and we actually built buildings for Chinese kids to come and go to high school there, and their spending kind of got the school through the 2009 recession. So that is expanding past colleges into the high school even below.
Let me come back to marketing perspective here. Question was asked is, what is something you've implemented, Nate, in your community that you could share with the rest of the audience here in the state that you could suggest to other rural communities?
Well, the Miami of South Dakota is taken, so I don't think you guys can take that idea from us. But I think honestly, one of the things that we're kind of continually talking about is just knowing those strengths and in that marketing side of it. What I would really, really stress is and it might even tail off a little bit with a tiny portion of your question is you've got to be able to have those relationships in a unified way. You've got to have the business community, those chamber of commerce, the economic development, the tourism. You've got to have them working together, because if you are not, you're out of sync. And two things happen. Again, if I were to focus just on the marketing, is you say what you do and then you didn't do what you say, right? And so you need to be able to make sure that you are working together and having those consistent relationships. And it doesn't mean you're always kumbaya. It doesn't mean you are always doing the exact same thing or giving up one mission for another. But what you're doing is understanding where those lines are so that you can stay in those lanes. And I often think of those lanes as a highway, where instead of that hard yellow lane, it's a white dotted lane where sometimes you switch into the next lane, you switch back. And that type of a relationship with those different entities and those different levels, from local all the way up to federal, if we can have those, that helps us all be able to understand what our overall goal is. And again, the moment you say what you're going to do and you don't do what you said, that's when you get in trouble, just with your brand. The other thing I would say when it comes to how you say something, if we're talking specifically about international, bringing international individuals over, we're a university community as well. We have a great ability in being able to bring international students to our community, but then we need to make sure that our community understands how do you adapt and how do you bring those individuals into your community and have them be part of it. How do you celebrate their heritage, and also how you teach them your heritage? And two points I would make out of that, which I think are kind of neat, is number one, it's often not, it's not sometimes what you're saying in that, it is how you're saying it. I think of the monk story where the monks are asking their head monk, and they say, hey, can we smoke while we pray? And the head monk says, well, no, don't dishonor. And so that, okay, yep. The next day they come back and they say, hey, can we pray while we smoke? And head monk says, well, yes, you can pray anytime you need. You know, there's no on and off switch on that. So a lot of times it's how you either ask or pose the question. I put that in because I think of actually an experience we just had yesterday. One of my assistant, Helen, is here with us. She's from Italy, went to the University of South Dakota, and is from Italy. We come here to the U.S. and we go, or to the U.S. Capitol. We go visit our sole congressman, Dusty Johnson. He gives us a quick little tour, and we're walking through the U.S. Capitol building. I've gotten to do that a lot of times, and I'm still a teary-eyed dork when it comes to that. I love that stuff, right? I love the history of it. I love what it represents and what it represents us to be. And I even had mentioned that to Helen, where I said, hey, listen, I hope you enjoy this. You know, and I understand if you don't, right? It's our American history. I get kind of a little geeked out on it. We walked through, and we looked at all of the murals. We looked at the dome and the mural on that, and she said, this is exactly what I see all the time. She didn't say it because she said that's not cool. She said that because this feels like home. And so we recognized that the U.S. Capitol building was a tribute to those countries that helped us and helped us build our country. And so now all of a sudden, asking, can you smoke while you pray, can you pray while you smoke, is not attracting someone to say, hey, come check out our historic building from 1884, when we're talking to people who have buildings from the 14th century. We're coming to tell them, come check out our building from 1884 that was inspired by your home. Come check out our U.S. Capitol that was inspired and the murals were painted by those from your country. Identify where it connects, and that's how you get track.
Thank you. There's a question back here, so it's been right in there.
Sure. Hi, Fran. Nice to see you. Erin Butler from Louisiana. Just a quick policy question. Is there any talk about dropping the COVID testing requirement coming into the U.S.? Some of our local travel and tourism, who mainly are targeted visitors from Europe, feel that might be impediment.
I know there's discussions on that right now. I don't believe there's any formal policy coming out. I will tell you though, just as an FYI, is that about 10 years ago, it's slightly the topic that we'll address it. About 10 years ago, in the Obama administration, they launched a 10-year strategy to say this is how many international travelers we're going to get next 10 years. And so the current administration has developed through an interagency process a new strategy to recruit attract international travelers for the next 5 years. It's supposed to be launched in June, I believe, announced by the Secretary of Commerce. And in that, they may address those issues. I know that's obviously an issue that's going to hold things up. But give me your card when we're done, and I'll talk to people who actually know the answers to that, and I'll tell you.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Just a quick follow-up on that. Do you guys have any data or estimates on what percentage of inbound travel you think that requirement may be costing?
We don't estimate that, no. We have not made those estimates. What I can tell you, what we've seen in the 6 months where the ban has been lifted, right? There's not been just a positive line going up. It was starting to go up, but if you remember, there was the Omicron variant, right? That happened in it was January. It peaked, and so visitation kind of from to the United States was kind of November. The floodgates are open, so November up, December, and then all of a sudden January down, February. But then the last 2 months, the resurgence again. So what I can tell you is that probably unlike any other industry, the international inbound travel is very elastic related to this COVID. So like if we see like another jump in COVID, You know, and we track it on a weekly basis. In the last, 3-4 weeks, it's kind of edged up a little bit. If it edges up significantly, just based on patterns that we've seen over the last 3 months, I wouldn't be surprised if the rebound paused. So it's very connected with COVID, with COVID cases in the United States, and the public being safe. So it's something to keep an eye out on.
One more question in the back, we're about ready to wrap up.
Yeah,
Eddie, you're next.
I'll be quick. I'm Shadman Bashir. I am from Dixie State University, which is now Utah Tech University 4 days ago, so we became that. And then this was the session I was most interested in, and everything that has been mentioned over here, we have applied that in COVID, and we have had amazing success. I mean, our small town, 1.5 hours north of Las Vegas, approximately 12,000 students. We, in COVID, international admissions were down 43%. We went up more than 300%. Small things that every speaker mentioned over here. One, we didn't get hit by China situation, because as soon as like the COVID, we have two kinds of plan. One is the long-term plan for international education, one is the short-term, which is the 2-year model. So when we invest in a country, in a region, we try to see what is the social, political, economic situation expected for that country for the next 2 years. We predict that, and based on that prediction, we create a model. And that's how when China went down, the international numbers, we didn't, because we call it in the shadow, under the shadow of the giant, the countries around that, and our numbers went up. So I remember our president telling us, so when we have any students in March 2020 for fall, we went up 300%. Number one, we did that part. Number two, our small, safe town. That's how we set our town. Safe but close to a larger city, which is Las Vegas, an hour and a half. So something so small as a shuttle from Las Vegas airport coming to Dixie campus, Utah Tech campus, that makes such a big difference when we tell people that your child can, from the airport, your child can come to on-campus housing directly. So something looks very small, but it's very big. Number two, connecting with families, and then tourism, huge impact. We don't have casinos, we have national parks. So national parks attract the numbers, which means on average, we are one of the low-cost institution, which is yearly minimum cost is $25,000 for each international student. That's the minimum. In Utah, last year, according to NADEC numbers, they brought in $207 million, and they support approximately 2,500 jobs statewide. And now our mission is to bring growth, and our model, our small town, small university model is actually working. Other institutions are reaching out trying to see how can we expand. It's not just about education. Education has to be connected with commerce. And that's
Thank you. That was
sorry, I just took too much time.
That was a great question.
Sorry,
Thank you very much.
sorry.
Eddie,
A question for David, and then I have a couple of observations for Nathan and Koka. Now, why are they now putting the issue where you have to have testing, negative testing, 1 day before you come for exam in the United States? That makes it difficult. Before it used to be 72 hours. That was doable. Like even myself, about traveling to the Mississippi, they said you have to have 12 hours before getting on a ship on the Mississippi River. It's impossible. How can I get it that fast? We say, okay, now you have to go to Walgreens, pay for it. Wait a minute. You are asking a traveler to pay more when they used to do it for free. Like my town in California, they can do it for free. I can get the result in 2 days, easy. But that says 12 hours. One difference. Wait a minute, that's hard. So are they going to change that? Could it be that they can waive that requirement, especially if people are fully vaccinated and boosted? Will that change, David?
Maybe. The Commerce Department, where I work, is not involved in that. It's not our responsibility. But I know that your concern and like this being a hindrance is being discussed. And I think to be honest with you, I think they're weighing, this is being weighed at a time when you have to admit the we thought that COVID was gone, and then it rebounded again, and then COVID was gone. So I think there is some caution, I think, that the government is thinking about, where do they want to let the floodgates open, no more testing, et cetera, and then what if another, strain comes? So I know that there are competing interests involved in that, which one of the things that our office used to do, and we paused it, is we used to forecast international travel. And when COVID hit, we said, there's no way we can forecast this right now, just because the next 3 months or 4 months is so uncertain. We have no idea what's going to happen. We've never gone through this again. So we've, done the Hippocratic Oath for doing it tomorrow. So we're not going to say this nation can grow by 25% next year. We have no idea. But that is one of the variables that I think is going to determine how strong the U.S. is going to be. Both related to inbound travel as well as outbound travel. The one thing I can tell you is that Americans' desire to travel internationally is very, very high right now.
And with that, I'd like to thank our speakers, Koka, David, Nate, and of course the audience. Thank you very much.